Okay, I heard the recording message. I think we're okay. And I'll get going. Thanks, Jean, for having me and everyone for being here. I'm at UWGB. As Jean said, I'm the director of Freshwater Strategy. This is a new position. I'm the first person to hold the position. I started in fall of 2020. It was developed with to focus on building water partnerships for the campus, both on campus, like among research groups and faculty and staff, and then also externally around community developments and just around the Northeast Wisconsin region. A big part of my job, like probably 75% of my work though, is I'm also the state lead on the designation of this National Estuary and Research Reserve, NERR. So I'm helping to shepherd the process through to get us on the map for the designation, and that's mostly what I'll be talking about today. I did want to share this picture though. This is from a UWGB student. Some of you might maybe know her. She's a photographer, Colette Rue. She has been taking some pictures as part of a NERR related project, and this is from the Bay, from first ice in November. It's really beautiful work. And I'll probably refer to it as NERR or reserve. It's kind of all the same thing. This is a national designation that we're hoping to bring to the Bay. Let me get into things here. I'll just talk about what it is, the vision we have for this designation, and then opportunities that come with it. Not sure how many folks are familiar with GB, but we're 4 campuses. We have a 4-campus system now, having taken in Sheboygan, Marinette, and Manitowoc a few years ago. And these are all well positioned on the shoreline of Lake Michigan. So I think it's like an 14 county footprint covering 420 miles of shoreline. This bringing in these campuses under the GB umbrella, and then having so many water focused programs within across our campuses was an impetus for this new position that I'm in. And it's kind of a springboard for the work of the NERR. There's also a rich eco-U history, which is kind of long-standing, long-term research that's been happening on the Bay by our faculty, staff, and students. And so there's a lot of things to build off of and to kind of go forth with the designation. And I will talk about what this designation is, but I'll just back up and tell a little bit of history of how this came about. So about like maybe 2014 or so, a group from Door County approached the university with an interest, kind of just a citizen group, with an interest in bringing some sort of freshwater presence, research and education presence to the region, recognizing the recreational and economic and cultural values of water to the region. They were interested in having some sort of stronger presence around water. The university was interested in something like that, of course, with this eco-U history and the presence on the Bay. And so we got a grant from the university, got a grant from the Wisconsin Coastal Management Program to explore different options of what a kind of a presence would be if there's already some sort of model for this. And they landed on this National Estuary and Research Reserve System, this NERR system, which is a program of the federal government, NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, as a good fit. And so it took a few years to gather support and to see if NOAA was interested in having a new reserve. And the timing was good in that the federal government, this program, had identified Lake Michigan and the Great Lakes as a place they wanted to bring another one of these designations. And so Wisconsin's interest and the federal government's interest in bringing one to the Great Lakes, those things coincided, and it was good timing. So after gathering some local support, community support, support from the United Nations, that was big. They sent an initial letter to NOAA even before the university was formally involved in this. The state of Wisconsin, via a letter from Governor Evers, formally entered the process in spring. Actually, I think it was exactly like this time in 2019, the end of March in 2019. So that formally entered us into this process of designation. And then I started a year later. So what are these places? It's a system. It's like if you think of kind of the national park as a federal system, these are the same thing. It's place-based system. They're non-regulatory state federal partnerships, and that combination of state and federal is, I think, somewhat unique and was appealing to the university that there was a big state emphasis here. And they're focused on research and education around estuaries and coasts and waters and coastlines and nearshore habitat. The Green Bay estuary, and as a review, like an estuary is where a large river mouth with chemically distinct and physical like properties meets a larger body of water, which has different chemical and physical parameters around it. So like think of where the Fox River meets Green Bay, or the rivers along the Peshtigo River, the rivers along the West Shore, where all that meets Green Bay, and then where Green Bay meets Lake Michigan. Those distinct properties, water properties coming together make an estuary. And Green Bay is, well, we like to say it's the largest freshwater estuary in the world. The St. Louis River is also a big one in Lake Superior, but they're both big systems. And so this is a significant estuary, a significant important water body, and this reserve system focuses on large estuaries. Like, as you can imagine, Chesapeake Bay is one of the ones in the system. The St. Louis River and Lake Superior is part of the system. And the NERR network has a catchphrase or a phrase, locally relevant, nationally significant, that each reserve, and there's 30 of them designated, is there to address local ecosystem challenges, whether that be, in our case, PFAS, other emerging contaminants, climate change impacts, the impacts on shoreline erosion and infrastructure from fluctuating water levels in the Great Lakes, harmful algal blooms. You know, we have many local challenges in the lower bay and the Lake Michigan shoreline. But by being part of this national network, you have access to both other sites, other reserves in the system that have addressed similar challenges or are addressing them. And also you have the expertise of NOAA and the federal government helping to hopefully deliver answers to your local challenges. This is a map of the network across the US. Our designation is, I'm assuming you can see my mouse moving right now. It's here, of course, in Wisconsin in red. So we're on the map now. We're going through the process concurrently with the state of Louisiana. Connecticut was the most recently designated reserve last January. And it's a 40-year-old program. One of the earliest reserves was actually one of the ones on Lake Erie, Old Woman Creek. It's near Sandusky, Ohio. So we will be the third reserve on the Great Lakes and the second in Wisconsin. And this will be the sole representation for the Lake Michigan, Lake Huron biogeographic region. So NOAA kind of sets these different regions where they want to put reserves to capture unique features of estuaries and lakes and oceans. And this will be the Lake Michigan one, at least for the time being. But yeah, you can see great distribution across the US. So it's in lots of different variety of habitats and ecosystem types and varieties of state federal partnerships. The one in Lake Superior is a UW extension program. The one in Ohio is a DNR program. There's lots of different models of what the state federal relationship looks like. And in our case, the university UWGB is the lead and will be the kind of day-to-day operator of this reserve. It's very place-based in that programs and work are focused on the challenges and the needs of the local region. Yep, so I mentioned our physical location. So there's going to be natural areas that are part of the reserve, and there'll be some built infrastructure like a visitor education hub. That's all going to be on the bay, and the long-term monitoring that will happen, the water quality and fisheries monitoring will be in the Wisconsin waters of the bay, but programmatically it will be serving a pretty large shoreline into the UP area of Michigan and the Lake Michigan coastline. I imagine long-term Lake Michigan would get another reserve because it's such a big system, but for now, this is the designation at the priority list. Yep, so the area here is the water area that we'll cover in terms of the research work. So what does a reserve do? The 1, 2, and 3 here are what all reserves do across the US. And then number 4 is a particular vision for us here in Green Bay, and I'll talk about what that is. But a few things, they're there to help address coastal management issues, as I mentioned, local coastal challenges. There's a big focus on education and enhancing public awareness, accessibility, learning on the water, bringing students to the water to have experiences at the shoreline and on the bay and in the wetlands. I think significantly for this region, reserves act as platforms for coordination of research and education, funding, planning, with the work that's happening on the lower bay, with the area of concern, moving towards delisting as an area of concern, the delisting of the Menominee River in northern Wisconsin, the Fox River cleanup. There has been a lot of progress towards restoration. There continues to be over the last 20, 30 years. So I think one niche that seems to be that could be filled or needs to be filled is to have this kind of planning and visioning for what happens after the EPA leaves and the delisting happens and you have the river cleanups are complete. There's still going to be ecosystem needs. So the NERR can be a platform to help organize and coordinate around that. And that's really a role that the reserve in Lake Superior is serving, as they also are on an area of concern at the St. Louis River. And all reserves have 4 focus areas that the whole system has this: research, education, stewardship, and training, with a dedicated staff member for each, a coordinator in each of these sectors, and some programs that we tap into at the national level that we bring here to the region. And then our number 4 goal for a reserve, and this is a little bit more specific to our here in Northeast Wisconsin, is we want to be a place to celebrate holistic connections to the holistic connection between water and communities and ecosystems. So that's things like celebrating the First Nations connections to water, the economic history and future prosperity around water and how that's important to our region, storytelling, art, photography, the spiritual connections, the recreational connections, kind of all of that holistic thinking. So we're trying to take that vision and the programming that we develop both now before we're designated and then into the future when we're up and running as a full reserve. And so for some examples of developing these water connections, and this is what we can do now before we're actually a reserve and before we have our federal funding, but just some small things. One of them is I was a participating scientist in this flow project at UW-Madison, where I was assigned a student artist from Madison who created this really beautiful piece of art capturing organisms of the bay in kind of a profile of Green Bay here. So we're still figuring out what to do with this photo. It's a woodcut or a drawing picture, but things like that. I have a Sea Grant funded project right now where I'm working with an audio professor on campus to do some surround sound documentation of the estuary, where we're recording like bird sounds overhead, pelicans on Cat Island, ice breaking, to eventually have an audio experience of the bay that would be long-term housed at the reserve. Some photography awards. I'm working with the archives on campus to create a digital collection of material like stories, pictures, maps, home videos about the bay. So lots of kind of things in the works that we're programmatically. So the designation process, it's 6 steps long. We just are finishing up step 2, which is site selection. I'll talk about that in just a second. For the next 2 years, we hope to be designated in 2025. We'll be working on our management plan and our environmental impact statement. And the goal is to be up and running as a reserve in the system by early 2025. So I want to talk about the site selection process, because that's the big thing that we just finished up in the fall of last year, December of last year. It's currently our site selection is being reviewed by NOAA. But we gathered together a few different committees to help us think about where to actually what lands and waters to include in the designation. So reserves are made up of both natural area sites where you take students to do long-term research, and you do your own long-term research, you do field trips there, and then also you have some built infrastructure. So we've been thinking about where to locate the natural area parts of the reserve, and that's what we've been working on the last 2 years. We had good representation of agencies from across the state and the region, and they came together to help us think about where to locate the parts of the reserve that identify as parts that we want to include in this designation. So a few considerations when we were thinking about selecting a site. The estuary, the Green Bay estuary, is a really dynamic system. I'm a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in the School of Freshwater Sciences, and our dean there, Val Klump, he's been working on Green Bay for a long time, and one thing he's always said about the system is it is really a kind of mesocosm of water systems across the world, and that freshwater systems. It's large enough that you have all of the chemical, physical, biological processes of any really large water body, even ocean systems. There's small tide, there's a seiche system, an internal wave, fisheries movements, you have dead zones, which are characteristic of large water bodies, but it's contained enough and managed in a way that you can do experiments and see results from ecosystem manipulations and policy changes. And that combination of helpful for large enough body of water to be of interest to scientists, and also small enough to do work on and see meaningful results, is a great place to do long-term research, to kind of elevate and be a place that other researchers can come to from around the US and the world who want to look at freshwater bodies and compare and contrast with where they work. And it's maybe been under promoted as kind of that, or not sure if promoted is the right word, but under celebrated as a really significant water body. So I think the NERR will help do that. But because it's such a large water body, when we were thinking about site selection, we were looking to capture two important gradients that are characteristics of the bay. One of them is a disturbance gradient, so that there's been a lot of, as I mentioned, restoration work that's happened around the whole estuary. And you have some very minimally impacted, more pristine type habitats up near Peshtigo in the northern part of the bay. And then you have much more impacted, changed, degraded, and then restored habitats in the lower bay. And so we want to tell that kind of story of restoration as part of what the NERR does. So we were looking for sites that would include some sort of gradient of both minimally impacted to low impact, or to more restored. So kind of a north-south gradient there. And then you also have this characteristic of a nutrient gradient, which is very heavy nutrient waters coming from the Fox River, heavily influenced by agriculture coming into the water in the bay here, and then meeting low nutrient waters coming up from Lake Michigan, and the complex processes that those two very distinct water bodies have. That's another interesting gradient that we wanted to capture with the sites, because we'll be doing long-term research on these sites. We'll be attracting research groups from other universities, and we wanted to have parts of the NERR that would be of interest to people who wanted to do restoration studies or nutrient studies and the like. I mentioned, so we're just now focused on the sites for the natural areas. There's been a lot of maybe community and political interest in the built infrastructure, but we're not quite there yet. So this is just thinking about where we put our natural areas. So our process was to first evaluate all public lands, because you have to put these on lands that are publicly accessible. We're not buying up new land or going onto private land. So we looked at all the public lands around the bay, including like playgrounds and Department of Transportation right-of-ways, then narrowed it down to relevant public lands. So things like parks and DNR forests and city lands and the like. And then we eventually ended up with 9 complexes of land that would be really ideal for, that kind of met the goals of what a reserve system does, the research and education goals. We applied a suite of criteria to those lands, the criteria that we got from NOAA, the federal partner, that we modified a bit to make it relevant to a freshwater system. And that took about 5 or 6 months with a committee of 16 members with different expertise. And in the end, we had some public hearings and we did site visits. In the end, we ended up with 3 major sites for the reserve. So these are the natural area sites where we'll do our kind of day-to-day work of the reserve system. A big parcel in Peshtigo, which represents that more minimally impacted, pristine system. You have a unchannelized, beautiful meandering river, the Peshtigo River, and then a lot of DNR-owned land here. You have a lower bay site, which has many different landowners. We only looked at public lands in here, but different landowners, the DNR, Brown County, the city of Green Bay. They're disconnected, but most of them are part of the Green Bay West Shore Wildlife Area. And then historically, the lower bay was one contiguous wetland site before the city was here and there was a lot of development. So we're trying to, in a sense, reconnect that visually and programmatically and research-wise by linking some of the West Shore sites with a site over here that the university owns, Point Sable and Wequiat Creek. We're calling that our lower bay site. And then there is some area in Sturgeon Bay that it's a combination of land owned by the DNR, Crossroads at Big Creek, and the Door County Land Trust. And this brings in, so we have this nutrient gradient from kind of pristine, low nutrient waters from Lake Michigan, meeting high nutrient, more disturbed waters from Fox River. And then you also bring in Sturgeon Bay, and that was added to bring in additional communities and populations along the West Shore and along the Door County. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I'm at home right now, and my little baby just walked in. Hold on 1 second. You gotta go out. So in total, it's about 37,000 acres, and it's a combination of land holding partners, which is really interesting. So it makes up a diverse type of, I should say most of the land is not university owned. And so this land will stay under ownership of the current landowners, whether that be DNR or Brown County, and we'll just go into some co-management with the current landowners and help do coordinated efforts on invasive species removal or shared management plan work. Most of the land is DNR owned. A big part is Brown County, and then a few other smaller entities, including some school districts and villages. And in terms of size, it's about 37,000 acres. The reserve in Lake Superior is 17,000. The biggest reserve is in Alaska. It's 300,000. So that's a pretty big range, and we fit within the range of many of the similar located reserve, like the other ones, the Great Lakes. I don't have to go into too much detail here, but essentially we have some maps of some of the areas included. Peshtigo, for example, mostly DNR owned. The lower bay these are the different colors represent different landowners, public landowners. So it's a combination of many different landowners on the West Shore. And then Sturgeon Bay, some areas north and south of the channel. But I kind of just talked about boundaries and sites for a while, but an important thing about the reserve, and maybe a relevance to your group, is that partnerships are not restricted by the boundaries, and that the reserve is there to coordinate and work with agencies and organizations across Northeast Wisconsin and really the Lake Michigan shoreline. And that those sites we talked about are just sites for doing work and bringing students out, and where we have some of our more focused research, but programmatically, we want to be working with groups across the whole region. So that's definitely not restricted by boundaries. And some of the types, so I want to talk about opportunities that come with designation and what kind of things we can expect in the region when we're designated. So research is a big part of the system, and an advantage of joining a federal system and having the federal investment is that you can invest in long-term monitoring. So we will be part of a system-wide monitoring program where essentially every reserve across the whole US, all 30 well, eventually 32 reserves, collect the same suite of samples, water quality, vegetation, habitat, weather parameters, and then that's fed to NOAA, and they have a national data set that essentially tracks the health of reserves across the US and the health of estuaries across the US, and we'll be part of that. Actually, I'll get into this in a second. So for education, we'll have access to a teacher training program every year, where for 2 weeks, teachers from all over the region come to the reserve and do hands-on experiential learning, and then take lessons back to their classroom. There's coordinated programs with K through 12 school districts, stewardship and training. There's a big focus here on working with municipalities and cities and county governments on helping them make science-based decisions around water issues, their waterfronts, their planning, their coastal management, and the NERR is there to help be a facilitator and bring resources to communities for their coastal challenges. And then I will talk a little bit more about some of the research opportunities. So this is actually from the Lake Superior Reserve. This is a picture of the Lake Superior Reserve working on the St. Louis estuary. But the long-term monitoring helps address both short-term explores short-term variability and these long-term changes that we see across water systems and in the Great Lakes in particular. You focus your work on the estuary, but then you also do some work up watershed. So once the NERR has been designated, the Bay of Green Bay NERR will identify some sub-watersheds within the much larger Green Bay watershed to do focused upland work. Of course, knowing that what happens in your waterways is impacted by what happens upland. Some of the parameters, as an example of what is collected, is right here. This is the Lake Superior Reserve's sub-watershed that they focus on is the St. Louis and Cloquet River watershed. Meteorological parameters, water quality parameters. Another thing of interest that might be of relevance to your group, I'm not sure how involved you all are in research, but if it is of interest to your members, once we're up and designated, we will have access to a pot of funding, a NOAA pot of funding called the Reserve System Science Collaborative. And this is funding that's run through local reserves, but to help connect with partners in the region to address local ecosystem challenges. There's collaborative research where you work with your neighboring organizations. For example, the Lake Erie Reserve worked on a project to understand nutrient retention by coastal wetlands. That they did that with their local NGO partners. There's transfer grants to help with a big focus on education, transferring knowledge to, again, like leadership, county level leadership, city level leadership around issues, coastal management issues. And then there's some capacity building for helping reserves help their communities set up trainings, having the right technology in place to offer trainings, be good partners for public engagement around coastal issues. So this is a nice pot of money that we'll have access to bring resources to bear to our community. As I mentioned, there's also built infrastructure. So over the next 2 years, we'll be thinking about where we want to put a visitor education hub. This is what the one in Lake Superior looks like. It's on Barker's Island in Superior, Wisconsin. Oftentimes these are places that have, well, not every reserve has a visitor center, but we do want to have one here in Green Bay, around the bay somewhere, not necessarily in the city of Green Bay. We do not want to be competing with like local nature centers or museums. So we want to figure out what kind of niche this reserve visitor center can fill. I think one vision we have is to be kind of a one-stop front door shop for anyone that's coming to the region that wants to connect with water recreation. So potentially partnering with like the DNR or Discover Green Bay or any of the tourism boards to have like a presence in a built infrastructure where visitors could come, and then we could direct them out to go do kayaking here or the best place for bird watching, and not necessarily within specific sites of the reserve, but kind of anywhere in the region, like kind of being a place to redirect people towards water recreation and fishing and kayaking. So that's one model. There's also usually touch tanks and visitor experiences. Some reserves have dormitories for visiting scientists and students. Wet and dry labs to do chemical analyses, meeting rooms, things like that. And as I mentioned, we'll be joining the national system. I've learned that in the same way that people kind of make lists of national parks that they want to visit and work down their lists, people have these same lists for reserves, National Estuarine Research Reserves. And it's exciting for us to be part of this network and draw people in from around the US that maybe wouldn't have thought to come to Green Bay to learn about our water systems. On the call, someone also mentioned the National Marine Sanctuary and the new sanctuary that's the Wisconsin sanctuary that's designated, I think, 2 years now, between Port Washington and Two Rivers area. That is also a federal program under NOAA, whereas that's less federal state and mostly federal, like the employees there are all federal employees, whereas the staff of the NERR are going to be state employees with federal support. We do see a lot of potential to collaborate with the National Marine Sanctuary, and their superintendent, Russ Green, and I have already been talking about different collaboration potentials. And I think between having the sanctuary there, the reserve here, and then the one in Lake Superior, this presence of places that are there to help protect and celebrate and educate around coastal resources will be a really great network. So we're looking forward to being more involved with the Marine Sanctuary upon designation. So our timeline, as I mentioned, we the end of last year, we finished up our site selection process. NOAA, it was with our federal partners, our nomination document for sites, and now we just have it back to respond to comments. Once we finish up responding, we can move on to, we've already actually started writing our environmental impact statement. We're going to start writing our management plan in the summer. This will be another good place where we might come to you, Clean Water Action, for input or feedback about what a management plan, what kind of coastal needs are there. This is our plan for the next 5 to 10 years of how we operate and work in the community will be guided by what we write in this management plan. So there'll be opportunities for public engagement and feedback as we write the plan. And then, as I mentioned, we're also going to be looking for a location for the visitor center with our goal of designation in early 2025 and up and running with programming by then. We have a website if you'd like to learn more. There's a Get Involved tab on the homepage, and that links you to a newsletter that I put out about quarterly or so. When we have public meetings, both virtual and in person, we advertise them through our newsletter. With the management plan and the environmental impact statement happening in the next 2 years, there will be a fair number of public meetings to get input and to just keep community and stakeholder groups informed of the work. So that's the best way to stay involved. Or you could just, of course, email me and I can add you to the list. But our website has videos and past recordings of meetings and downloadable information, brochures and things like that. I'll end with one more picture from Colette from the Bay of the Arctic bomb cyclone in December. And I'll just pause there and take questions that anyone from the audience might have about the designation or the work that the university is doing around water.
Great,
wow, that was a great presentation. Yeah.
Thank you. Great. I'm glad you found it informative.
Thank you, Emily. I was just going to add that if you have a question, be sure to unmute, and then when you're done with your question, if you could mute again, that would be great.
Dean, will this presentation be available? Can we get the PowerPoint or whatever it is?
Yes, the presentation will come out next Tuesday on the weekly update, and then in a month or couple months, it'll be on our website as well.
And then, Dean, I can also just give you the slides if you want to share those on your website or email it out to people.
Okay.
I would say also that, we're in this designation process. We have a lot of things to learn as we go. And I'm happy to come back in a couple of years when we're up and running and fill you in on how the plans have actually materialized.
Yeah, I kind of thought it was interesting, and it's same for the national sanctuaries, but they all started on the coast. But finally, the Great Lakes are getting some attention. So this is potentially will be the third one, and I think it's the second one for the sanctuaries, but there's a third
Mhm.
one being looked at right now too. So I think that's fantastic because the resources here for the Great Lakes is just, unprecedented. So that's cool.
Where's the upcoming one in the sanctuaries in the Great Lakes? What's being considered?
Ontario or Huron, Ontario.
Oh, yeah. So there's
Ontario, I
Thunder
think.
Bay.
Ontario.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm hoping, so one kind of complaint or I don't know, like an issue that Great Lakes scientists have had for a while is that the National Science Foundation, when it gives out funding to water related research, the like pot of money that the Great Lakes gets compared to ocean systems is so small. And so I'm hoping that the visibility that we have with a new marine sanctuary and a new National Estuary Research Reserve, although a different part of the federal government, will help just elevate the profile of the Great Lakes for a variety of reasons, but also just to bring more national federal funding to do long-term impactful research.
That's great.
Addressing of issues like the invasives, whether it's Phragmites or the efforts to reintroduce wild rice, do any efforts like that have a role in what the NERR would be doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so the university is already involved in reseeding and wild rice programs. That's a big focus of the Lake Superior Reserve. So the kind of water programs the university does, both Phragmites treatment and work on wild rice, those will be kind of folded into the work of the reserve. And then, like, for example, NOAA is doing a national or a Great Lakes assessment of all the wild rice programs that are happening right now across the Great Lakes. Like this, I think, helps us better access and coordinate other wild rice seeding, for example. Also, but with the designation and offering more connection between the different land holding partners, the DNR and Brown County and the land trusts, there can just be better coordination, for example, on Phragmites removal or other invasive removal projects or treatment projects. So it's just, it helps bring organizations together and landholding partners together to have a more coordinated effort.
Emily, there's a question in the meeting chat. Can you access that okay?
Yeah, let me open it. Have you selected the image for the NERR? The black and white image or a portion of it would be impressive, maybe in your Green Bay green and white. That is a good question. So yeah, that image is, I've totally not used it well yet. I would like to use it more. I'm actually working with an art and design class on our campus this semester who is developing, the students in the class are developing different types of logos and imagery for me. And I report to Matt Dornbush, the dean of our business school, for the two of us to sort through and then hopefully identify kind of a few winning designs that we would take back to the marketing department to bring with the the marketing sheen that is required by UWGB, because we don't really have a great strong image yet as we've gone through designation, and so we are working with students to try to create something like that. I would love to see that black and white image though, either put on a t-shirt or used as a blow up picture or something, because whenever I share it, it gets a lot of attention. And I also see, will the NERR examine the volume of water in the Michigan Huron system? I haven't actually seen other reserves take on water quantity issues before, but it's not off the table. Again, like we're there to help address local challenges. So if that emerges as a top concern, part of writing the management plan is going to be identifying what are the most pressing ecosystem shoreline management challenges, and based on community input, talks with the DNR, talking with NOAA. So we'll see what kind of comes to the top to help guide our first few years of designation. And then we are going to be, NERRs everywhere are really open to where there's community need and interest in whatever kind of challenges they address. I don't know much about the volume of water, like that challenges with the volume of water, besides it's like issues with ice cover and the impact that low ice years has on water quality or water quantity across the Great Lakes generally.
I have a question. Will the NERN connect to things like birds? From what I understand, the Bay is a nationally kind of recognized bird area. Plus, there's the whole flyway thing and stopover issue that's going to be very important from into the future, et cetera.
Yes. One of the parameters of the site selection process was looking at including habitat that's particularly important for migratory birds and the flyway. And we had Dr. Amy Wolf from UWGB, who does a lot of bird work for the university. She was on that committee of site selection. Point of Sable, which is a bird stop zone or a flyway area, migration area, is one of the sites. I certainly see it as being a priority for the reserve. So Cat Island also, which folks may know as the restore or in progress restored islands in the lower bay. They're being used as dredge spoil sites by the Army Corps of Engineers, but they also have a lot of restoration value because it's recreating historic barrier islands to help protect the lower bay and Duck Creek. We, for a while, considered putting Cat Island in the reserve system, but because it's an active dredge construction site, it's not currently included. But once the management of the Cat Island is transferred from the Army Corps to Brown County, it makes a natural fit within the reserve. And I mentioned Cat Island because it's become such a significant location for migratory bird stopovers, piping plovers as a nesting habitat, pelicans for nesting, and a rookery. And so, yeah, certainly we are thinking about the role of migratory birds and how the NERR can be supportive of that too.
Well, Emily, thanks for doing your presentation, and very exciting. And just had a couple of questions. Is the Mink River going to be included in the area?
Yeah, so the Mink River is not officially in the designation boundaries because it's on that is outside the watershed. It's a Lake Michigan watershed estuary, although it's a significant estuary. So we only formally, because of the way the designation was set up, it has to be Green Bay watershed waters and on the Green Bay waters. But like I mentioned, the partnership boundaries are not restricted by those boundaries. So collaborative research, comparative research, that could definitely happen with the Mink River estuary.
Great. And it's nice to see the recreation component to this, and how it connects communities and people to, the resource and the place they live. And I know there's a really good Northeast Wisconsin Paddlers is a really good group. Yeah. And I know they're having a film festival on Saturday night in Oshkosh. And but it's just kind of a different way to bring in people, to be aware of what you're up to, the reserve. So and then another thing that's going on is this, like in 2022, there was a water walk that went on. It was that went from kind of the shores of Door County down to Green Bay, and it's kind of a ritual based thing. It's got a Native American First Nations component to it, and so there's going to be another walk that's, as I understand, that's going to be going on this year, and it's going to go from Marinette down to Green Bay.
Oh, I haven't heard of this.
Yeah. So we can put you in touch with some of the organizers of that.
That'd be great. And the paddling one, although I've heard of that group, I haven't connected with them. I will say that I've talked to, there's a Center for Water Policy at UW Milwaukee, and the director, who's just been there maybe a year, I think she started around the same time I did at my job. She has a big focus on wanting to get more of this Lake Michigan water trail going, this like connecting kayak spots and having a really great connected water trail. And although she's looking at Lake Michigan, we did talk about how would we bring in Green Bay into the water trail work. So we've both been pretty busy the last few years, but it's on my mind as like a long-term thing, is to get more into this water trail visioning for the region.
Oh, that's really exciting to hear that you're thinking that way and that might happen. So,
Yeah, recreation, the Rookery Bay, which is a reserve in Florida, they have at their visitor center, they have a kayak outfitter that works with them to do programming and bring out naturalists. Things like that, like really having on-site recreational opportunities is definitely something that's we're thinking about with some public-private partnerships for the reserve.
wonderful. And then was just curious, I know there's at the mouth of the Fox River, there's like an education center.
Oh, Jack Day. Mhm.
Yeah, that's it. And so I don't know if that's gonna be involved in
Yeah, that is that building is managed, I think owned and managed by Newater, the municipal sewage district for the city. And so I've worked with them to run we ran a teacher workshop there last summer. They work really closely with the university on offering programming. It's great as a publicly accessible site that you could do programming in right at the mouth of the Fox River. And in terms of a location for a visitor center, basically any area between like Sturgeon Bay to Marinette is on the table right now because those are all part of the NERR. So we haven't designed it yet, but we'll have some sort of comprehensive process to evaluate areas for built infrastructure. But yeah, having already existing programs at places like that is great for partnerships in the future for the NERR.
Great, thank you.
Emily, I'm just going to mention that there's a question in the meeting chat for you.
Oh, okay. How much does this effort follow other efforts around the world? I'm thinking of the book, The Natural Step, which I'm not familiar with that book, but in terms of efforts around the world, well, the NERR system is a national system, but I think we have ambitions because of how unique Green Bay is and just, the future of freshwater and the global importance of freshwater, of using the NERR system and the connection to NOAA to raise the profile of Green Bay as a site for international researchers to come. I am not that connected to other water efforts outside the US, but I'm always open to learning more. And I'm not familiar with that book, but I'm happy to look into it. Oh, I see another one. East River Collaborative is actively developing a canoe kayak trail along the lower East River to its mouth, the Fox River. Yep, that's really great to know about. And although the East River is not in the NERR boundaries, again, it's a partnership that we'd want to develop because it's in the Northeast Wisconsin estuary footprint.
Well, if there aren't any further questions, Emily, I'll have you turn off the recording. So
Yes, give me 1 second.